What happens when unbreakable determination collides with immovable prejudice? Tonight we bring you the story of a woman who was judged by the cover but owned the entire library. She was a titan of industry, a self-made billionaire. Yet one rainy night, the staff of a world-renowned luxury hotel saw only the color of her skin. They denied her entry. They humiliated her. They left her standing on a cold, wet street. But they made one catastrophic mistake. They didn't know who they were dealing with. In 5 minutes, she made a phone call. And 5 hours later, she didn't just check in. She took over. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of how Dr. Serafina Hayes bought the building and the earth-shattering karma that followed. The rain over Boston was relentless, a cold, driving, slate-gray sheet that blurred the city lights into a watercolor mess. It was the kind of evening that made the warmth and golden glow of a place like the St. Regis Grand seemed less like a luxury and more like a sanctuary. For Dr. Serafina Hayes, it was supposed to be the latter. She was exhausted, the deep, bone-weary fatigue that only a 16-hour flight from a tense biotech conference in Seoul can induce. Her mind, usually a whirlwind of genetic sequencing algorithms and market projections, was blissfully, blessedly quiet. All she wanted was a hot shower, a soft bed, and the anonymity of a 5-star suite. She dressed for comfort on the flight, not for presentation. A simple, elegant black cashmere tracksuit by Loro Piana and a pair of pristine but unassuming white leather sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her face was free of makeup. She carried a single, well-worn leather satchel containing her laptop and essential papers. To the undiscerning eye, she might not have screamed, "Billionaire CEO of Nexus Gene Tech," the revolutionary firm that was on the verge of curing 2 forms of hereditary blindness. And at the St. Regis Grand that night, the eyes were fatally undiscerning. As her Uber pulled away, Serafina dashed through the downpour towards the hotel's ornate revolving brass doors, pulling her satchel closer. Before she could reach them, a figure stepped out from under the green awning, blocking her path. He was a doorman, young, with a severe haircut and a uniform so crisp it looked like it could cut glass. "Can I help you?" he asked. The question was standard, but the tone was not. It was laced with a weary suspicion, the kind reserved for people who didn't belong. "Yes, I have a reservation," Serafina said, her voice calm, despite the rain dripping from her hair. "The presidential suite. The name is Dr. Hayes." The doorman Connor blinked. He scanned her attire from the damp cashmere to the designer but subtle sneakers. His eyes lingered for a fraction of a second too long. A flicker of disbelief, or perhaps disdain, crossed his face. "The presidential suite is occupied," he said flatly, his posture unmoving. Serafina frowned. "That can't be right. It was booked 3 months ago by my executive assistant. Please check again. Serafina Hayes." "I don't need to check, ma'am," Connor said, his voice hardening slightly. "There's no availability." He made a vague gesture down the street. "There are other hotels in the area you might find more suitable." The implication hung in the damp air, as thick and unpleasant as the city smog. "More suitable for you." Serafina felt a familiar cold spike of anger. It was an emotion she had learned to master decades ago, to fold it down into a tiny, dense diamond of pure resolve. She had faced it in university science departments dominated by old white men in boardrooms, where she was the only woman, the only person of color. She had never let it crack her composure. She wouldn't start now. "I'm not interested in other hotels," she stated, her voice losing its warmth and gaining an edge of steel. "I am interested in the suite that my company has already paid for. I'd like to speak with the manager." Connor's jaw tightened. He clearly wasn't used to being challenged by people he had already dismissed. He spoke into the radio on his shoulder, his voice a low mutter. "Mr. Finch, we have a situation at the entrance. A woman insisting on a reservation that doesn't exist." A few moments later, the revolving doors spun and out stepped Mr. Bartholomew Finch. He was a man who seemed to have been born in a 3-piece suit, tall, slender, with silver hair swept back from his temples, and a nose that seemed perpetually tilted downwards as if smelling something unpleasant. He surveyed Serafina with an air of profound disappointment. "Good evening," he began, his voice a silken, condescending drawl. "I am Bartholomew Finch, the general manager. My doorman informs me there's some confusion." "There's no confusion, Mr. Finch," Serafina replied, meeting his gaze directly. I have a reservation for the presidential suite. My company Nexus Gene Tech has already wired the full payment for the week. I suspect your system may be down or your doorman is mistaken. Finch gave a small, humorless smile. It didn't reach his cold, pale blue eyes. Our systems, I assure you, are impeccable, as is my staff. Perhaps you are the one who is mistaken. It's an easy error to make. Many people aspire to stay at the St. Regis, but we maintain a certain standard. He looked pointedly at her tracksuit. A certain decorum. The insult was no longer veiled. It was laid bare on the marble steps, as ugly and stark as a wound. He was telling her she didn't look the part, that her money, even if it were real, couldn't buy her way past his personal, prejudiced velvet rope. Are you denying me entry to this hotel, Mr. Finch? Serafina asked, her voice dangerously quiet. I am protecting the ambiance of my establishment, Finch retorted, puffing out his chest slightly. We have a curated guest list. We are not a common inn. Now, if you'll excuse me, you're creating a draft. He turned his back on her, a gesture of ultimate dismissal, and began to walk back towards the warmth of his gilded lobby. Connor the doorman took a half-step forward, ready to physically bar her way if she tried to follow. Serafina stood there in the pouring rain, the city lights of Boston, a fractured mosaic behind her. Humiliation, cold and sharp, pricked at her. But then came the familiar diamond of resolve burning hot in her chest. Finch had made a critical error. He thought he was dealing with just another woman to be brushed aside. He had no idea that he had just insulted one of the most powerful and now most motivated women in the country. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't plead. She simply turned her back on the golden light of the St. Regis, walked to the curb, and pulled out her phone. The rain plastered her hair to her face, but she didn't notice. Her fingers moved swiftly across the screen, dialing a number she knew by heart. The phone was answered on the first ring. David, it's Sarah. Sorry to call so late. No problem, Sarah. Are you checked in? How was the flight? David Chen's voice was always alert, always ready. He was her COO, her legal counsel, and the sharpest mind she knew. The flight was fine. The check-in had a snag, she said, her voice betraying no emotion. Change of plans. I need a new project for you. Top priority. I want you to find out who owns the St. Regis Grand Boston. Not the brand, the physical building, and the land it sits on. I want to know if it's publicly traded or privately held. I want to know its financial health, its debt load, its key stakeholders. I want a full workup on my desk in 1 hour. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, the only sound the faint hum of a server room. David was too professional to ask why. He simply processed the request. The building itself. Got it. 1 hour. And David, Serafina added a new chillingly calm tone in her voice as she looked back at the hotel's arrogant facade. Get our mergers and acquisitions team on standby. Tell them to clear their schedules for the next 48 hours. She hung up, hailed another cab, and as she slid into the back seat, she gave the driver the name of a rival luxury hotel. As the car pulled away, she looked at the St. Regis Grand one last time, not as a guest who had been rejected, but as a predator who had just spotted its prey. Mr. Finch wanted to protect his precious ambience. Serafina Hayes was about to buy it. While Serafina was checking into a penthouse at the Mandarin Oriental, David Chen was unleashing the full formidable power of Nexus Gene Tech's corporate machine. David was a maestro of information warfare. Within minutes, teams in Boston, New York, and Hong Kong were awake and mobilized. Subscriptions to premium financial data services like Bloomberg Terminal, Refinitiv Icon, and FactSet were humming. Legal analysts began combing through Suffolk County property records and UCC filings. The initial report landed in Serafina's inbox in just 58 minutes. It was concise and brutal. Subject: Project Nightingale. Preliminary analysis. The St. Regis Grand Boston. Ownership. The hotel property and business entity, Sterling Grand Hospitality LLC, is 100% privately owned by Mr. Preston Sterling III. The Sterling family has owned the property for 4 generations. The St. Regis branding is a management and franchise agreement with Marriott International, but Sterling owns the asset. Financial health critical. Sterling Grand Hospitality is leveraged to an estimated 95% of its asset value. They are carrying a $250 million balloon loan with Goldman Sachs with a massive principal payment due in 90 days. Revenue has been flat for 3 years, while operating costs have increased 15%. Key pressure point. Our analyst at Goldman Sachs' discreet inquiry indicates Sterling has already been denied a refinancing extension. He is in default territory, and the bank is quietly preparing to seize the asset. They would much prefer a private sale to avoid a messy public auction. Preston Sterling III is desperate. Conclusion. The asset is vulnerable. The owner is motivated. A fast all-cash offer would likely be irresistible. Serafina read the email twice, a slow predatory smile spreading across her face. It was better than she could have hoped. This wasn't just a fortress she had to lay siege to. It was a rotten structure ready to collapse at the slightest push. Preston Sterling III, a man clinging to the legacy of old money, had been mismanaging his inheritance into the ground. And his man on the ground, Mr. Finch, was too busy policing the dress code of potential guests to notice the financial ship was sinking. She dialed David. "It's a go," she said without preamble. "I want to own it by sunrise tomorrow." "Sarah, that's aggressive," David said, the only hint of surprise in his voice being a slight pause. "Due diligence alone." "The due diligence is done," Serafina cut him off. "They're broke and the bank holds all the cards. This isn't a negotiation. It's a rescue mission they don't know they need. Set up a shell corporation. Let's call it Aura Hospitality Group. No connection to Nexus. I want to buy this clean." "Understood," David said. "I'll get our M&A head Richard Wells on the line with Goldman's commercial real estate division. We'll bypass Sterling entirely for the opening move. Go straight to the bank that holds the leash." "Exactly," Serafina confirmed. "Offer them $300 million all cash. Closing in 24 hours, no contingencies. That's $50 million over the loan value. It makes the bank whole, covers their fees, and leaves a nice little nest egg for Mr. Sterling so he can save face. He won't have time to shop for a better offer. Emphasize that the offer is only good for the next 2 hours. We create a crisis, and we are the only solution." The next few hours were a masterclass in corporate raiding. While Serafina calmly showered and ordered a late dinner of lobster bisque and a green salad, David Chen and his team operated like a special forces unit. Richard Wells, a man who could smell financial weakness from 1,000 miles away, contacted the lead banker at Goldman Sachs. The call was placed at 1:30 a.m. Boston time. As expected, the banker was awake, already stressed about the Sterling account. Wells' offer came as a shock, then a godsend. An all-cash deal from a newly formed anonymous hospitality group that could close in a day. It was unheard of. It was clean. It saved the bank the headache and negative press of a foreclosure. The banker agreed to present the offer to Preston Sterling III immediately with the bank's strong recommendation to accept. At 2:45 a.m., a bleary-eyed Preston Sterling III was woken by a call that was both his worst nightmare and his only salvation. His bank was calling in his debt, but they had brought him a buyer. A mysterious, aggressive buyer. He saw the numbers. The offer was firm, the deadline terrifyingly short. His lawyers, woken from their beds, advised him that a better offer was a fantasy. The alternative was public humiliation and bankruptcy. The legacy his great-grandfather had built would be sold on the courthouse steps. He saw the $50 million that would be left for him after the debt was cleared. It was a fraction of what he once believed the hotel was worth, but it was enough to maintain his lifestyle to disappear quietly into a comfortable retirement. Pride warred with panic. Panic won. By 4:00 a.m., preliminary terms were agreed upon via a frantic series of emails and encrypted calls between Sterling's lawyers and David Chen's team, who were operating under the Aura Hospitality Group banner. Non-disclosure agreements were signed digitally. The speed of the transaction was dizzying, designed to prevent any leaks or competing bids. By 5:30 a.m., as the first hints of dawn touched the Boston skyline, a courier was dispatched to Preston Sterling III's Beacon Hill mansion with the final purchase agreement. Another was sent to the Goldman Sachs Tower. Serafina stood by the window of her suite at the Mandarin Oriental holding a cup of tea. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from David. "Project Nightingale is complete. The cage is ours. Congratulations, you are the new owner of the St. Regis Grand Boston. Closing paperwork will be finalized by 10 a.m. Serafina took a slow sip of her tea. She hadn't slept. She didn't need to. The exhaustion had been replaced by a current of electric, ice-cold satisfaction. She thought of Mr. Finch likely asleep in his bed, blissfully unaware that the ground beneath his feet had fundamentally shifted. He had judged her for her clothes for her race. He had barred her from his precious hotel. He had no idea she was now his boss. Phase 1 was complete. Phase 2, the reckoning would begin after breakfast. At 11:00 a.m. sharp, a black Cadillac Escalade, the kind favored by presidents and titans of industry, pulled up to the curb of the St. Regis Grand. The morning was bright and clear, the previous night's storm having scrubbed the sky to a brilliant blue. The same doorman Connor was on duty. He saw the Escalade and immediately straightened his posture, a flicker of importance in his eyes. This was the kind of arrival he was paid to facilitate. He moved to open the rear door, a practiced, deferential smile already forming on his face. The door opened and Dr. Serafina Hayes stepped out. Connor's smile froze, then evaporated. He stared. It was the woman from last night, but she was transformed. She wore a bespoke cobalt blue power suit from Tom Ford that radiated authority. Her hair was styled immaculately, and she wore subtle but expensive diamond earrings that caught the morning light. Her eyes were hidden behind a pair of dark, impenetrable sunglasses. She looked every inch the billionaire she was. She paused and looked at Connor, her expression unreadable. For a terrifying second, he thought she was going to speak to him, to call him out. Instead, she simply walked past him, her heels clicking with sharp rhythmic purpose on the pavement. Beside her was David Chen, looking sharp and severe, in a dark gray suit carrying a leather portfolio. They swept into the lobby and the atmosphere instantly changed. The hushed, genteel murmur of the hotel lobby seemed to falter. Heads turned. The concierge looked up, a question in her eyes. Serafina walked directly to the front desk. The clerk, a young woman named Amelia, looked up. "Good morning, welcome to the St. Regis. How may I help?" She stopped, recognizing the woman from the staff gossip that had already started to circulate about the incident last night. Before Amelia could say another word, Mr. Bartholomew Finch emerged from his office, drawn by the sudden shift in the lobby's energy. He saw Serafina, and his face went through a rapid series of emotions, first surprise, then irritation, then outright fury. "You again?" he hissed, striding towards her. His face flushed. "I thought I made myself perfectly clear. Security," he barked, looking around. "Remove this woman from the premises immediately. She is trespassing." Two burly security guards started to move forward, their expressions grim. Serafina didn't flinch. She slowly took off her sunglasses, revealing eyes that were calm, cold, and utterly in control. She let the silence stretch for a beat, enjoying the tableau of Finch's self-righteous indignation. "That won't be necessary," she said, her voice clear and carrying across the marble lobby. Several guests, sensing drama, had stopped to watch. "Oh, it is entirely necessary," Finch sneered. "You were told you were not welcome here. Your kind of disruption is not tolerated." David Chen stepped forward, opening his portfolio. "Mr. Bartholomew Finch," he asked, his tone crisp and professional. "What is it?" Finch snapped, not taking his eyes off Serafina. "My name is David Chen. I am the Chief Operating Officer of Aura Hospitality Group," he said. "As of 10:01 a.m. this morning, Aura Hospitality Group is the sole proprietor of this asset, Sterling Grand Hospitality LLC. In simpler terms, Mr. Finch, we own the building and everything in it." He slid a single document across the polished marble of the front desk. It was the executed deed of sale. The lobby fell into a stunned, absolute silence. The security guards froze mid-step. Amelia, the clerk's jaw was literally hanging open. Finch stared at the document. He picked it up with a trembling hand. His face, which had been red with anger, was now draining of all color, leaving a pasty, sickly white. He looked from the paper to David and then to Serafina. The full cataclysmic reality of the situation crashed down upon him. The woman he had sneered at, insulted, and cast out into the rain just hours before was not a trespasser. She was his new boss. "No," he whispered. That's impossible. Preston Sterling, he would never..." "Mr. Sterling made a very prudent business decision," Serafina said, her voice cutting through his denial. "He was a motivated seller. I was a motivated buyer. It was as my COO just said, a very simple transaction. She took a step closer to him. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had inverted with the force of an earthquake. She was the mountain now, and he was the rubble at its base. Last night you told me I wasn't suitable for this hotel. She said, her voice low but carrying to every corner of the silent lobby. You judged me on my appearance. You humiliated me based on your own pathetic, narrow-minded bigotry. You spoke of standards and decorum. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Well, Mr. Finch, I am the new standard, and my first official act as the owner of this establishment is to inform you that your standards are no longer required. Your decorum is dismissed. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Finch swayed on his feet, looking as though he might faint. You can't. Oh, I can, Serafina said with a chilling finality. Security. She called out, her voice now ringing with command. The two guards who moments before had been ready to throw her out now looked at her, awaiting orders. Please escort Mr. Finch to his office to collect his personal belongings, and only his personal belongings. Then escort him off my property. Ensure he does not return. The guards' faces blank moved towards Finch. He looked around wildly, seeking an ally, but found only the stunned or averted gazes of his former staff. His authority had vanished. He was nothing. As security led the ghost-white, trembling Finch away, Serafina turned to address the silent, wide-eyed staff. Good morning, she said, her voice now warmer but still firm. My name is Dr. Serafina Hayes. As you've just heard, I am the new owner of this hotel. Let me be perfectly clear. The era of exclusion at this establishment is over. The only things that will be judged here are character, kindness, and professionalism. We will be a place of welcome, of true luxury, which is the luxury of being treated with dignity and respect regardless of who you are, where you're from, or what you're wearing. She looked around the lobby, her eyes meeting those of the clerks, the bellhops, the concierge. There will be changes, but for those of you willing to embrace a new philosophy of inclusivity and excellence, your future here is bright. A full staff meeting is scheduled for 2:00 p.m. in the grand ballroom. Until then, please return to your duties. She put her sunglasses back on, and without a backward glance walked towards the elevator bank. David held a key card he had prepared, and he pressed the button for the penthouse floor. As the door slid shut, sealing her in a cocoon of polished brass and mahogany, Serafina finally allowed herself a small, tight smile. The reckoning was complete. Now the real work could begin. The story of the hostile and all but named takeover of the St. Regis Grand exploded. It was too delicious a narrative to stay quiet. Within hours, a tip from a stunned hotel employee had made its way to the Boston Globe. By evening, it was on Forbes, Bloomberg, and the Wall Street Journal. The headlines were sensational. Biotech billionaire buys hotel that denied her entry. The ultimate revenge, CEO Dr. Serafina Hayes, fires manager buys building, a lesson in luxury nexus. Gene Tech founder shakes up Boston hospitality. Serafina's public relations team, usually focused on navigating the complex world of FDA approvals and shareholder reports, was now fielding calls from every major news network. Serafina issued a single concise statement. I saw an underperforming asset with unrealized potential held back by an outdated management philosophy. My companies do not invest in exclusionary practices. We invested in the future of hospitality. We are excited to begin this new chapter. It was a masterstroke of corporate speak that both confirmed the story and elevated it from a personal vendetta to a strategic business move. It made her look not just powerful, but savvy. Behind the scenes, Serafina was moving with surgical precision. The 2:00 p.m. staff meeting in the grand ballroom was a turning point. She stood before the 100-plus employees not as an avenging angel, but as a visionary leader. The St. Regis brand under our new ownership will stand for something more. She announced, her voice resonating with passion. It will be a beacon of innovation, not just in service, but in human dignity. Our luxury will be defined by how we make every single person who walks through our doors feel. She laid out her initial plans. An immediate top-down review of all hotel policies, from hiring practices to guest relations. A complete overhaul of staff training programs with new modules on implicit bias and cultural sensitivity, to be designed by leading sociologists from Harvard University just across the river. But her most significant move was a personal one. During the chaos of the morning, she had noticed one employee who hadn't gawked or reveled in Finch's downfall, but had simply looked on with a kind of thoughtful sadness. It was a young concierge named Isabella Rossi. Serafina had David pull her file. Isabella was bright, multilingual, had a degree in hospitality management, and had received stellar guest reviews, but had been passed over for promotion 3 times by Finch in favor of less qualified male colleagues. Serafina summoned Isabella to the now vacant general manager's office. The young woman entered timidly, expecting the worst. The office still had the faint scent of Finch's expensive but cloying cologne. "Ms. Rossi," Serafina began, gesturing for her to sit. "I've reviewed your file. You're overqualified for your current position." Isabella swallowed. I enjoy my work, Dr. Hayes." "I'm sure you do," Serafina said with a smile. "But I'm promoting you. Effective immediately, you are the new director of guest experience. You will report directly to me. Your first task is to help me rebuild the soul of this hotel. I want you to work with the HR team to implement the new training programs and to be the standard bearer for our new philosophy." Isabella was speechless. Tears welled in her eyes. "Dr. Hayes, I don't know what to say. Thank you." "Don't thank me," Serafina said. "Your record speaks for itself." Mr. Finch was blind to talent when it didn't look the way he expected. I, on the other hand, have excellent vision. The promotion of Isabella Rossi sent a powerful message throughout the hotel. The old guard was out. Meritocracy and decency were in. Morale, which had plummeted under Finch's tyrannical and prejudiced reign, began to cautiously rebound. Serafina didn't stop there. She announced the St. Regis Grand Boston Community Scholars Program, partnering with Bunker Hill Community College, to offer paid internships and scholarships for students from underprivileged backgrounds who wanted to enter the hospitality industry. Her first public appearance as the owner wasn't at a glamorous gala, but at the college's campus in Charlestown, announcing the initiative. She was transforming the hotel from a symbol of crusty old-world exclusion into a symbol of modern, inclusive success. It was no longer just a building, it was a statement. The story was no longer about revenge. It was about redemption, both for the hotel and for the community it served. Serafina was playing the long game. She knew that true power wasn't just in the ability to acquire, but in the ability to build something better. She was settling into her new role, enjoying the process of remaking the hotel in her own image. She assumed the drama was over. She assumed the problem had been excised when Bartholomew Finch was escorted out the door. She was wrong. The rot he had presided over went far deeper than just prejudice, and the true hard karma had not even begun to strike. For the first month under Dr. Serafina Hayes' ownership, the St. Regis Grand Boston underwent a renaissance. The suffocating pall of Finch's reign lifted, replaced by a palpable current of optimism and energy. The story of its acquisition had made it the most talked about hotel in America, a symbol of a new, more dynamic form of luxury. Isabella Rossi, blossoming in her new role as Director of Guest Experience, moved through the lobby not just as a manager, but as the living embodiment of the hotel's new ethos. She addressed guests by name, empowered her staff to solve problems creatively, and her warmth became the hotel's most valuable asset. The new training programs, designed in collaboration with Harvard's sociology department, were initially met with some old guard skepticism, but soon the staff saw the real-world benefits of empathy and cultural awareness. Morale soared. Serafina, for her part, found an unexpected satisfaction in the project. It was a refreshing change from the sterile, high-stakes world of biotech. Here, the results were immediate and tangible. A glowing review from a guest, a smile on a staff member's face, the vibrant buzz in the renovated lounge. The hotel, once a source of her profound humiliation, was becoming a source of genuine pride. She believed the problem Bartholomew Finch had been identified and excised like a tumor. She thought the healing could now begin, but she had only removed the visible sickness, unaware of the deep systemic infection that festered beneath the surface. The first hint of this deeper malady came not from a guest complaint or a staff report, but from the quiet, meticulous work happening in a rented office suite downtown. As part of the standard acquisition process, Serafina had commissioned a full forensic audit from Deloitte. It was a formality, a way to clean up the messy books left by Preston Sterling III and identify operational inefficiencies. The team of accountants began the tedious process of digging through a decade's worth of financial records. The discovery was made by a junior analyst named Ben Carter. Ben was young, hungry, and possessed a near-photographic memory for numbers. He had been assigned the tedious task of reviewing vendor contracts. For 3 days, he waded through invoices for everything from polished silver to industrial-grade cleaning supplies. It was on the 4th day, late in the evening, fueled by stale coffee and a desire to impress his superiors, that he flagged a file. The vendor was Noble Vintners, the hotel's exclusive supplier of high-end wines and spirits. On the surface, nothing seemed criminal. Noble Vintners was a legitimate registered business, but several things bothered Ben. The prices were consistently 20 to 25% higher than the industry benchmark for identical vintages. There was no record of the hotel ever soliciting competitive bids for the liquor contract. Noble Vintners had held it uncontested for 12 years. Most peculiar was an evergreen clause in the contract that automatically renewed it each year unless canceled with a full year's notice, an absurdly restrictive term. Curiosity piqued. Ben did something his seniors might have considered a waste of time. He ran a deep background check on the owner of Noble Vintners, a man named Alistair Finch. The surname rang a bell. A quick internal search of the hotel's former management brought up the name Bartholomew Finch. A few more clicks on a genealogy website confirmed it. Alistair was Bartholomew's older brother. Ben felt a jolt of adrenaline. This was no longer about inefficiency, it was about blatant nepotism. He brought his findings to his team leader, a seasoned auditor named Maria Flores. Maria had seen this kind of small-time graft before. "Good catch, Ben," she said, her expression grim. "If he did it with the wine, he did it with something else. Pull every major supply contract Finch personally approved for the last 10 years. Cross-reference the ownership of every single vendor with Finch's known associates, friends, and family. Let's see how deep this rabbit hole goes." What they found was staggering. The rabbit hole wasn't a hole. It was a sprawling, subterranean labyrinth of corruption. The thread Ben had pulled unraveled Finch's entire tenure. The hotel's linens, supposedly premium, 1,200 thread count Egyptian cotton, were supplied by Egyptian Comforts, LLC, a company owned by Finch's sister-in-law. A subsequent physical inspection of the linens revealed they were actually a much cheaper 600 thread count blend. The hotel had been overpaying by nearly 40% for an inferior product. The prime meats and seafood for which the hotel's steakhouse was famous were sourced from oceanic prime cuts. The prices were astronomical. The company's registered agent was a man who had been the best man at Finch's wedding. They found invoices charging the hotel for Japanese A5 Wagyu that, according to import records, had never even been procured by the supplier. The outsourced IT support, the flower arrangements, the transportation services, all of it was a closed loop of kickbacks and fraudulent billing orchestrated by Finch and benefiting his inner circle. It was a masterful conspiracy hidden in plain sight. Finch had used his position as general manager not to run a hotel, but to preside over his own personal fiefdom. He had systematically bled the establishment dry, siphoning off millions while maintaining a public facade of impeccable old-world class. The reason owner Preston Sterling III was on the brink of bankruptcy was no longer a mystery. Finch had been robbing him blind for years, and the lazy, disengaged aristocrat had never once thought to look closely at the books. David Chen received Deloitte's preliminary report and immediately drove to the hotel. He found Serafina in the penthouse suite, reviewing architectural plans for a new spa. She was smiling, energized. David's grave expression instantly dispelled her good mood. "Sarah," he said, his voice low as he placed the thick binder on the glass coffee table. "We have a problem, a much bigger problem than Finch's attitude." For the next hour, he walked her through the report. He laid out the web of deceit, the shell companies, the inflated invoices, the network of family and friends. He showed her the estimated financial damage, a conservative projection of $15 million in direct fraud over 10 years, with perhaps millions more lost in opportunity costs and reputational damage. Serafina listened in absolute silence, her face growing colder and harder with each revelation. The personal anger she had felt on that rainy night felt petty and insignificant compared to this. This was a profound systemic betrayal. She finally understood. Finch's prejudice wasn't just a character flaw, it was a crucial tool of his trade. His obsession with a certain clientele and his condescending dismissal of anyone who didn't fit his narrow worldview, it was all a brilliant, sinister defense mechanism. He built a wall of snobbery to keep out anyone who might be smart enough or curious enough to question his operations. His racism was a smokescreen for his larceny. She had been denied entry not just because she was a black woman in a tracksuit, but because she represented the unknown, the observant outsider, who might notice that the emperor and all his suppliers had no clothes. When David finished, Serafina stood up and walked to the window, her back to him. The city lights below seemed to mock the darkness she had just discovered. "He didn't just insult me," she said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "He used the name and legacy of this institution as a shield for a common criminal enterprise. He exploited his employer's trust. He defrauded the guests. And he betrayed every honest employee who works hard here every day for a legitimate paycheck." Her initial victory firing him, buying the hotel, felt like a child's game. It was a slap on the wrist for a man who deserved to be in chains. The satisfaction she had felt was replaced by a cold, righteous fury. She turned around and David saw a look in her eyes he had only seen a few times before. The look she got right before she crushed a competitor or launched a hostile takeover. It was the look of absolute unyielding resolve. "A civil suit is not enough," she declared. "Clawing back the money is secondary. This man cannot be allowed to simply fade into a disgraced retirement. He needs to be held accountable by a power greater than a corporate lawsuit." Her voice dropped, filled with the chilling certainty of her next move. "David, get our top litigators from Ropes and Gray on a conference call. I want them to package every piece of evidence, every invoice, every email. We are not just cleaning house. We are burning it down to the foundation and salting the earth. We're taking this to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Bartholomew Finch thought he was the king of this castle. He's about to find out what it feels like to be a pawn in a much bigger game." The decision to escalate the matter from a corporate scandal to a federal case marked a profound shift in Serafina's mission. This was no longer about rectifying a personal insult or even reclaiming stolen money. It was about cauterizing a wound, about holding a man accountable, not just for his crimes, but for the arrogance that allowed him to believe he was untouchable. Justice Serafina resolved would not be a quiet settlement or a civil penalty, it would be a public reckoning. Her legal team, led by the venerable Boston firm Ropes and Gray, moved with the lethal grace of sharks sensing blood in the water. The conference rooms on the 48th floor of the Prudential Tower became the war room. David Chen, whose mind thrived on complex logistics, worked seamlessly with Deloitte's forensic accountants and the firm's top litigators. They didn't just collect evidence. They curated a narrative of incontrovertible guilt. They spent weeks mapping Finch's criminal enterprise, the whiteboard in the main conference room, transforming into a dizzying spiderweb of shell corporations, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, and interconnected names. A breakthrough came when a junior Deloitte analyst cross-referencing property tax records discovered that the independent cleaning service that charged the hotel nearly double the market rate was owned by a trust, and the beneficiary of that trust was Finch's wife. It was another layer of his insulated familial scheme. Isabella Rossi, now the respected director of guest experience, became an invaluable asset. She spent days sifting through old digital archives, her institutional knowledge proving more insightful than any algorithm. She unearthed an email chain where Finch had personally berated a junior manager for attempting to source a cheaper, higher quality champagne, stating that their long-standing relationship with Noble Vintners, his brother's company, was paramount to maintaining the hotel's character. It was the smoking gun, a direct link between Finch's authority and his criminal intent. After 2 months of relentless round-the-clock work, the case was ready. It was a masterpiece of legal devastation, bound in a dozen thick navy blue binders. When David Chen and Serafina's lead counsel met with the U.S. Attorney for the District of Massachusetts, they didn't come asking for an investigation. They came delivering a conviction on a silver platter. The federal prosecutor, a steely-eyed woman known for her aggressive pursuit of white-collar criminals, listened in silence for the first 20 minutes, her expression skeptical. As the evidence mounted the flowcharts, the bank statements, Finch's own emails, her skepticism melted away, replaced by a focused, predatory gleam. She saw the scope of the fraud, the blatant wire and mail fraud, and the clear pattern of racketeering. The case was immediately fast-tracked to a grand jury. Meanwhile, Bartholomew Finch was living in a state of self-imposed delusion. Humiliated by his firing and ostracized from the elite circles he once commanded, he had retreated to a modest condo in Quincy. He saw himself as a martyr, a victim of the new woke culture personified by the audacious Dr. Hayes. He spent his days in a fog of resentment, reading luxury lifestyle magazines and nursing expensive glasses of scotch he could no longer truly afford. He believed his financial schemes were his secret triumph, a hidden victory buried deep within the old hotel's books that no one would ever uncover. He felt secure in his crimes, never once imagining the formidable high-powered machine that was grinding inexorably towards him. The hammer fell on a crisp October morning. Finch was at a small cafe trying to recapture a sliver of his old routine. He was stirring his cappuccino, contemptuously eyeing the other patrons, when two impeccably dressed FBI agents approached his table. "Bartholomew Finch," the lead agent asked, his voice calm and professional. Finch looked up, an expression of sheer annoyance on his face. He assumed they were from a collections agency regarding his mounting credit card debt. "Yes, what is it?" The agent didn't waste a moment. He presented his badge. "I'm Special Agent Miller. This is Special Agent Thorne. You're under arrest on behalf of the United States government for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering." The clatter of a fork hitting a plate echoed in the suddenly silent cafe. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. Finch's world, which had been shrinking for months now, collapsed into a single point of unbearable public shame. The color drained from his face, replaced by a sickly mottled gray. "This is absurd," he stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. "There's been a mistake." "The only mistake," Agent Miller said coolly, "was thinking you wouldn't get caught." The metallic click of the handcuffs locking around Finch's wrists was the loudest sound he had ever heard. As he was led stumbling from the cafe, past the staring eyes and camera phones of the other patrons, the full weight of his predicament crashed down upon him. This was not the act of a vengeful CEO. This was the cold, impersonal power of the federal government. He was no longer a disgraced manager. He was a federal defendant. The news of his dramatic arrest sent shockwaves through Boston's business community and reignited media interest in the story. The indictment of his co-conspirators followed swiftly. His brother Alistair, faced with the prospect of sharing a cell with violent criminals, folded during his first interrogation, agreeing to a full confession and testimony against Bartholomew in exchange for a plea deal. His sister-in-law and old roommate followed suit. Finch was utterly alone, abandoned by the very people who had profited from his scheme. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence and the unified testimony of his former partners, his legal options were non-existent. His court-appointed lawyer made it clear a trial would be a suicidal act of hubris. He pled guilty. The sentencing took place 6 months later in the John Joseph Moakley U.S. Courthouse. Serafina attended, sitting alone in the back row of the gallery, a silent observer in a dark gray suit. She wasn't there to gloat. She was there to witness the final definitive closing of a chapter that had begun with an act of petty cruelty on a rainy night. She watched as Bartholomew Finch, a man who seemed to have aged a decade in a few months, was led into the courtroom. His expensive suits were gone, replaced by ill-fitting government-issue clothing. His arrogant posture was gone, replaced by a defeated slump. He was a ghost of the man who had dismissed her on the hotel steps. The judge, a stern man with a reputation for fairness, did not mince words. "Mr. Finch," he said, his voice echoing in the solemn chamber, "you were placed in a position of immense trust. You were the steward of a Boston landmark. You betrayed that trust. You didn't just steal money. You fostered a culture of corruption and deceit, all while cloaking your crimes in a veneer of elitism. This kind of arrogance is a cancer on our business community. It cannot and will not be tolerated." He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $15.7 million in restitution. As the U.S. Marshals moved to lead him away, Finch's gaze swept desperately across the courtroom, finally landing on Serafina. Their eyes met for a fleeting, eternal second. She saw no lingering anger or defiance in his. She saw only the vast, desolate emptiness of a man who finally understood the totality of his ruin. He saw in her calm and unyielding gaze the face of the karma he had so foolishly summoned. That evening, back in the magnificent penthouse suite of the St. Regis Grand Boston, Serafina stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows watching the lights of the city twinkle to life. The hotel was thriving, a testament to her vision. Isabella was proving to be a brilliant leader. The Community Scholars Program was changing young lives. The building felt lighter, cleaner, as if a fever had finally broken. Her initial humiliation had been the unlikely key that unlocked a hidden sickness, and her resources had provided the cure. It was hard karma in its purest form, a justice that was not swift and easy, but methodical, absolute, and ultimately cleansing. She hadn't just bought a building, she had restored its honor. And so the story of Dr. Serafina Hayes in the St. Regis Grand comes to a close. This wasn't just about revenge. It started with a moment of shocking prejudice, but it ended as a powerful testament to integrity. Serafina didn't just buy a hotel. She exposed a crime, rebuilt a culture, and invested in a community. She reminds us that true strength isn't just about turning the tables, but about clearing the entire room of its poison and building something just fair and prosperous in its place. Bartholomew Finch's fate is a stark reminder: the karma that comes for you isn't always loud and immediate. Sometimes it's a quiet, meticulous investigation that ends with the cold, hard click of handcuffs. If this story of justice and empowerment resonated with you, hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that success is about rewriting the rules, not just playing the game. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you won't miss our next incredible story. What did you think of Mr. Finch's ultimate fate? Was it justice or was it karma? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing from you. Thanks for watching.